Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my session today. And just, kind of briefly to reiterate what the session is going to be about, I'll be talking to you about how to incorporate desk research in every study. And I'll be giving you some tips and tricks about, how you can do that quickly and efficiently. So before I get started, I'd just briefly like to introduce myself. My name is Ani, and I'm a UX researcher at Blink UX. In fact, I am tuning in live from one of our labs in our San Diego studio, and you can see some of the beautiful exposed brick action we've got going in the background. So if any of you are in San Diego, I'd love to connect and say hi. I'll be talking to you about desk research, as I said, and more specifically about how to do it more quickly and efficiently. A bit about my background. I have used desk research both in academia and in industry to make sense of complex problem spaces and arrive at actionable insights, both during my grad school and during my job at Blink as well. And over multiple years of reading thousands of articles, millions of words, hundreds of journals, I've identified some ways to strategically simplify desk research processes without compromising on their quality. And that's really what this talk is going to be about. So today we'll be talking first about why should you care about desk research at all, briefly, before actually learning about how to do it more effectively, efficiently, and quickly. What's the value that desk research can add? And then we'll be talking about two things primarily. We'll be talking about how to minimize the effort you put into desk research, and that way you can incorporate it in a lot more projects, apart from those that are explicitly scoped for desk research or competitive evaluations. And we'll be talking about how you can use desk research to maximize both the project quality and the quality of the desk research itself, right? And then at the end, I hope to have some engaging discussions with you all and answer some questions. So before we get started, I'd like to kind of briefly preface this talk by saying that we'll be talking a lot more about desk research in the form of academic and industry literature, and not proprietary or local, like archival data that your organization may already have, right? So the reason being that a lot of this talk was inspired by my understanding that there is a big gap in the industry when it comes to using academic literature in our projects. And I feel that the literature that we currently have can add a lot of value. However, some of these strategies that you'll see during the talk, you'll find that you can easily generalize them, even if you're using desk research for other kinds of sources or in different kinds of projects like comparative audits, competitor analysis, which typically wouldn't involve a lot of academic literature as well. So, and I'd also like to briefly add a disclaimer that I'm not advocating for the fact that desk research can completely replace user input or first-hand data, but it can definitely augment it and allow you to see more than what usually would be possible. So, but this does require some extra work. So let's talk about, how to do that in every single project. So why should you care about desk research, right? So pop quiz. The time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and complexity of choices. Can anyone take a guess in the chat about what this statement is, or who actually, postulated this statement? Anyone? Do you recognize this statement? That's a good guess, Jerry. Fitts law, but it's kind of related, but it is not Fitts law. Or Paul says the tyranny of choice. Yes, that's definitely what it's referring to. Yep, Tripp, you're correct. This is Hicks' law, one of the most widely used and widely known laws of UX, which basically relates to the fact that users will take more time to make a choice as the number and complexity of the choices increase. And we see this law applied across a lot of UX design elements and principles, whether it's designing menus, designing onboarding processes, e-commerce websites, complex interfaces, right? So this is a really well-known law in UX. So over here, I have some screenshots from the original paper that Hick published, right, where he actually postulated this law. You'll notice that in the very first paragraph, he says that this paper was built on the observations of the work done by other researchers like Merkel, Woodsworth, Blank, right? So why is it called Hick's law then, right? Anyone, like, do you have an idea, like, why is it called Hick's law? So it's called Hicks law because it was Hick who was able to actually see the patterns across the data that came before him, and he was able to analyze the consistent patterns across a range of different studies and postulate that into Hicks law. And why was he able to do that? Because he had a bird's eye view and that strategic nature that allowed him to kind of analyze these different patterns, different consistent findings, and analyze the themes across a range of studies to actually postulate a law, which by definition is consistent across a range of domains and a range of studies. So desk research can be, similarly to your context, can be a quick and budget-friendly way to do high-quality research, get familiar with novel domains. It can give you access to a lot of information with low effort and also be a way to verify the reliability and validity of your predictions. So, this talk is titled Standing on the Shoulder of Giants. And what does that mean when it comes to desk research? So here's what Pascal, I'd like to use this quote to kind of understand that phrase, standing on the shoulder of giants. So he's referring to the researchers who came before him and the pioneers in his field in this quote. So because having risen to a certain level where they have brought us, the slightest effort makes us go higher, and with less effort and less glory, we find ourselves above them. It is from there that we can discover things that were impossible for them to perceive, and our view is more extensive. And although they know as much as we could notice about nature, they did not know as much, and we see more than they did. So I'd like to pull two statements from this quote that will be the backbone of this entire presentation: slightest effort and seeing more than those who came before us. So when it comes to slightest effort, it's really about minimizing the effort we put into desk research without compromising on the quality. So let's talk about minimizing effort. I'll talk first about scoping desk research because based on the project, you may or may not have enough time allocated to do desk research explicitly. And we'll talk more about how to actually do desk research quickly within the allocated time. So to efficiently scope desk research, first you need to define your objective, right? And that's really important with any method, really. Why are you doing this research project in the first place? And why desk research as compared to any other method? Then you need to look at the time, right? You need to actually take a realistic look at the time you have available on the project to do desk research. And based on that, you will think ahead and strategize how you can extract the most value from desk research within the allocated time. When it comes to defining your objective, it's really about asking yourself, why are you doing desk research and what are you hoping to gain from it? Some common uses of desk research could be you're doing it to get familiar with a new domain, industry, or research topic. So as UX researchers, I think none of us, would be unfamiliar with AI, but AI is a new domain. So like if you're doing research in AI, or if you've been doing research in, let's say, the automotive industry, but then you are on a project that involves healthcare. It's new to you. You need to get familiar quickly to actually extract more meaning from your research methods, your stakeholder interviews, and actually talking to users within that field? Or are you trying to learn about the nuances of researching a specific population? Like, for example, a population with accessibility needs that you're unfamiliar with, and you need to see how they could or possibly apply to the product that you're researching or your specific research method. Or you're trying to form hypotheses and guide creation of your session guides, your surveys from a place of understanding rather than just using your own intuitive understanding. You want to actually refer to some sources that came before you. So based on these objectives, the time and level of analysis you need from desk research would differ. For example, like if you're trying to get familiar with a new domain, you could possibly read a few industry sources, blogs, websites, and still extract value from that. However, if you're trying to inform deeper level hypotheses, you probably need a much deeper level of analysis to see those patterns. So next, based on your objective, you also need to take a realistic look at the time, because in industry, we rarely work on projects where time isn't an issue, right? So it's important to remember that even if you have a really short duration of time that you can devote to desk research, it can add value even in that short duration of time, because just taking that step of briefly reading what has come before you, even if it's for a short duration of time, still gives you an edge over researchers who don't do that. And I've personally experienced this because I was recently researching how developers use coding tools, and I've not come from a software background myself. And just reading about that before I actually started the project helped me, get a head start in making my research plans, my session guides, and delivering a more comprehensive report at the end. So when you look at the time, usually you'll have two different scenarios to strategize with. The first one would be that desk research is not in the project scope. So it's not really planned, by the people defining the timelines, managing different work streams. So it's on you to kind of fit desk research into the project, and you'll probably have a lot lesser time than scenario two, where desk research is scoped as an actual supplementary method in your project. So if desk research is not in the project scope, you probably have a day or two max to perform desk research before you start ramping up with the project activities that are scheduled, right? So in this case, you should break your desk research down into two limited chunks. Part one is all about exploring, collecting, and indexing. So what do I mean by this? Is the process of actually looking up sources, collecting, the sources you want to refer to, and then kind of indexing their summaries and the information within them. So when you're doing this, and you probably have less than a day at, to do this, you should limit that exploration to high-level sources that summarize research and other detailed sources in a really concise manner. So what this allows you to do is look at summaries of a vast amount of research in a short amount of time. So good high-level sources could be other literature reviews, meta-analyses, blog articles written by industry pioneers who look at all the things that are happening now in their domain and summarize that for you to easily consume. And if there are specific questions, be really choosy about the detailed sources that are focused on your specific objective. Don't go into rabbit holes, because that can actually increase the time you spend, and without actually adding value within that time you have. And it's also important to start forming a mental model simultaneously to index information as you consume it, because you probably don't have a lot of time to analyze your sources in this scenario. Then indexing information and forming that mental model actually relates really nicely to part two, which is about analyzing, distilling, and recommending. So once you've identified your sources, you can quickly kind of extract the major themes, and you don't have to do a level of analysis that you would do if desk research was a solitary or supplementary method. But even just having that base level understanding of the themes can add a lot of value, and then contextualize them to your objectives. So for example, if it is about researching a specific population, for example, employees in the retail industry. So what are the specific issues that those employees would have, and contextualize them to this to your objective, in the sense that is it about their shifts, their workload, the physical aspects of their work, their relationships with their managers, or their different work contexts. So like really be specific about your project context when you're arriving at these action-oriented insights and recommendations for your project. It could be as simple as, hey, during scheduling session times with retail employees, we may need to be cognizant of, that researchers may have to work outside work hours because, the shift timings are really irregular in that vertical. I know this example seems intuitive, but you can think about different sorts of applications with the populations you research as well. Now, scenario two is about when desk research is actually supplementary to your other method. So there is a specific time in the project scope for doing desk research, but it has to be balanced with other project tasks, right? So now you can actually break down these steps into be more specific and devote more time to each and every step. So then let's talk about these four. Part one is about strategizing and scoping. So how are you going to use desk research with these other methods, whether it's a survey, it's a usability study, it's user interviews? Like, what is the value that desk research can provide? Is it at the project start to inform the session guides, to inform the metrics you want to collect from a usability study, or is it to contextualize what you've learned from your user interviews at a larger scale, what it means for the industry, how does your findings differ from other industry findings, other industry trends? So what is the value you're hoping to extract? And then from this objective, you can see, like, are the sources easily available? Are they adequate? If they are, then you probably need lesser time for part two about exploring and collecting, right? Because it's relatively easier to find. But if it's a really nuanced and up and coming field, you probably have to do a deeper level of search to arrive at those specific sources. So that can really help you understand the time you need to devote to part two about exploring and collecting. So when you go about exploring and collecting, and then talk more about search strategies in the next section, but in general, high-level sources are valuable to get familiar. But in this case, you probably want a lot more detailed sources that are relevant to your objective. So choose your rabbit holes, but choose them wisely. You still want to only choose the detailed sources and do that deeper level of analysis for things that are relevant to your objective. If I'm researching AI applications in coding, I don't want to go into rabbit holes about human AI collaboration in the automation industry with self-driving vehicles, right? And at the same time, when I'm reading through these sources, I want to document summaries at the same time and make a local list. Because if I want to go back to a source later, I don't want to be hunting through my entire search process again. I want an easily accessible summary of sources and a local repository, right? That's similar to taking notes during user interviews. Part three is about indexing and analyzing, where you basically look at every source you've read and the summaries and understand how these different parts are piecing together, how themes from your desk research fits with other project work streams and their progress, if you're doing them simultaneously, or if one is coming after the other, what your themes imply for the next phase, or how your themes relate to what came before. Then you basically move to reporting and integrating. So if desk research is the last piece, you would develop a contextualized and comprehensive report that allows you to kind of add more value to the findings that came before. If desk research is being done first, you can distill the analysis into actionable insights, as I've been saying, like whether it's to make session guides, whether it's to inform, like research with specific populations, and you can also integrate the findings with other data as you would do in a mixed method study as well. Now, I've talked about, scoping desk research and like what the steps entail, but how can you do these steps more quickly and efficiently, right? So desk research and doing it quickly is really about three things: searching efficiently, smartly using your sources, and yes, enlisting AI support. So when it comes to searching, keywords are the key, right? You get what you search for. So you can minimize the time spent collecting sources by refining what you search for and where you search. So I've been recently using AI to kind of give me a head start into the keywords that are most appropriate, because AI can help outline major research areas in a problem space, and I can really use that understanding to focus and narrow my search. I can use AI to direct me to high-level sources. I can ask ChatGPT, hey, can you suggest me some articles or journals to read about so-and-so problem? And from those high-level sources, I get a general idea of what are the nomenclatures, what are the terms, what do they mean. So I can actually use those to really refine my search strategy. And also, I can be more direct and ask AI about relevant search queries to understand a specific field as well. Once I have those high-level sources and that first level of collection going, I can identify the relevant databases and articles by looking at the references, which I'll get to in the next section as well. And at the same time, I'm indexing what is working and what is not. So I'm learning from my mistakes and also learning, okay, this is working, so I should really be cognizant of using this keyword in the future if I need to do a deeper level search too. Now, I said that you can actually use your sources to, refine your search. So how do you do that? You can do that by using two major search strategies. First, let's talk about what's called as feed backward search, which really comes down to looking at sources that other people used. And to do that, you can use the reference section of an academic article, or some really good industry blogs also cite their sources at the end. So you can see that, what are the sources that came before them that are relevant to the field. For example, this article was published in 2008. So obviously you can look at the sources that came before 2008 that may be relevant. So when you're reading through the introduction of a paper or an article, bookmark the relevant insights and the associated citations, and definitely search more deeply for the citations that are associated with the points that resonate with you. And you can also look at the titles in the reference section to search for articles that you think might have the most relevant information. While doing that, also keep the recency of references in mind. For example, this is already 5 years ago over here, if you were doing this research in 2008. So what does that mean for a field like AI, where every year or every 6 months, there's a new advancement, right? What is the time frame you want to stay in? And then the next strategy to actually identify more recent sources is called feed forward search, which is basically who used them. So who are the more recent sources that cited a paper that you just read? So the same paper in 2008, for example, has been cited in a paper in 2022. So you can use the search strategy to identify relevant and recent sources. And you can also use the strategy to verify if older findings still hold true, or if new research has indicated different directions. So these two strategies can ultimately be a really good way to build an extensive list of sources by starting from a really less number. And then when it actually comes to reading your sources and extracting the information more quickly, it's about reading smartly, not harder, right? So it's kind of like Star Wars, which happy May the 4th, by the way. It's that based on the, uh, order you read the article in, you basically can create your own journey and extract the findings that are most relevant to you. So my recommended order based on my experience has been reading the abstract first. That makes me understand whether I want to read this paper? Do I want to invest my time in this? Then the conclusion, which is really important because it makes me understand the bottom line. What are they even saying, right? Because like these in long articles or academic literature can be really dense. Just like explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. The good conclusions usually do that. After that, I can understand if it matters to me. And then I go to the results and discussions to kind of understand the deeper level findings. How does this relate to other research? And then after that, if I am really invested in this source and I want to use it for my major, analysis, then I want to verify if the results were actually valid. What method did they use? What was their rationale? So this is kind of like a process of elimination, where at these different points, if I find something that's irrelevant, I wouldn't have invested time that I can't get back. So just some general tips, like, for different sections, you should read introductions first, in case you don't want to follow that order. If you're just reading papers to form an initial understanding, get familiar with the problem space, introductions are great places to find that summaries and also help you index complex information into digestible chunks. You should read methods first if you're trying to determine which methods may be appropriate to research a specific problem space, and you want to know more about doing a particular research method. For example, the right method, rapid iterative testing, that's something that's new. And if you want to apply it to your project, you really want to understand the steps and the rigor that goes into it. So you would look at papers that have used right methods in the past. And read results and discussions first. If you're looking for specific recommendations, you're trying to triangulate data to see if like other papers also found this, whether it's valid, reliable, and you're trying to form hypotheses for your own study. Using AI, it is the best time to be doing desk research. I so wish I had all these tools in grad school because you can actually use these tools to summarize and analyze a large number of sources and give you a good head start in, understanding the themes. And just like all you got to do is index a list of sources and ask AI to summarize it. Here are some like tools that I recently found. If you ask Bing, for example, like research questions, it can, cite sources and direct you to appropriate sources as well. Semantic Scholar has an AI plugin where, based on your question, it highlights the relevant parts of a paper. Consensus, Iris, and the last 4 tools on the slide also summarize huge amounts of research into major patterns and themes for you automatically. So now that we've talked about minimizing research, let's talk about using this desk research into our projects, like how to use desk research to maximize project quality. And you can only do that if you actually maximize the quality of desk research. And I'll be talking to you about both these things next. So maximizing project quality using desk research. It really comes down to 2 things. I think it's first to inform your research design, as I've been saying, and second, to help you contextualize your findings and to root them in industry trends and into a larger context that kind of shows how strategic you're being as a researcher, and that you're thinking about the larger implications of your research outside of that specific objective as well. So when it comes to informing research design, this is really relevant at the project start, where desk research can give you a head start in making informed decisions about your research design by learning from what others did, right? You don't want to be reinventing the wheel when you already have a good design and insights to learn from. So which methods are used most commonly in a particular domain? Which are the most successful, right? Because researchers usually cite their learnings at the end as well and give some recommendations too. What are the most relevant variables like and dimensions for your research problem? If you're designing a usability study, A/B test, what are the variables you should actually measure and look out for based on an informed understanding? If you're designing a survey and a session guide, what are the dimensions that are relevant for your research problem so you actually have a head start in developing session guides and surveys that will give you a deeper level of information rather than being, oh, I wish I knew that. Well, if you did desk research, you would have already known that before starting out and designing those things. And what are the relevant hypotheses? How can you test them? Again, relating to my point about using the most successful methods. And also when it comes to developing a plan for analysis, right? What are the benefits and drawbacks of particular analytical methods in terms of time, cost, validity, reliability for a particular domain? What are other researchers suggesting? Learn from their experience, right? You don't have to start blind. Pay attention to the appendix in these academic papers, because I was recently designing a survey and I actually found a lot of relevant survey questions using appendix of previous desk research, because they have all their source materials printed in the appendix that you can actually use as inspiration. So you have a good rationale again to present to stakeholders. If they ask why this question, then you can be like, well, this question actually yielded so many useful results in a similar domain, and therefore I think it can be useful for this project as well. And then at the project end, desk research can allow you to make predictions about the success of your design recommendations and inform future research. So, and I see some UX designers in the audience as well, right? When you're making design recommendations and the client is like, I don't like this, or your stakeholder is like, I don't like this, you can use desk research to actually rationalize your design recommendations by saying hey, here's the data about why this design recommendation is best for so-and-so design problem. And Hicks' law that I referred to is a great example of that, right? Now, Hicks' law is something intuitive and well-known, so you don't actually have to justify, simplifying your menus and those choices. But let's say if that was the case, you could actually cite Hicks' law and be like, hey, this thing has been there since 1950 and has been consistently working across a range of domains, environments, problem spaces. So that's why I've actually implemented this. And when it comes to informing your future research, again, it's all about using desk research to outline some concrete actionable next steps that have a rationale behind them. So contextualizing findings, desk research, again, can seem kind of unactionable and bland and less glamorous than user interviews. So how can you actually make stakeholders care? You can, contextualize these academic findings within industry trends and practicality, because I've often experienced people saying that, hey, academics are idealistic and kind of skeptic about things, but industry is a lot more pragmatic and optimistic, right? So you can use both academic data and contextualize them within the industry kind of optimism and practicality to actually make your suggestions seem not naive, right? And you can generalize experimental effects observed in studies to your domain based on the industry constraints that you've been aware of by talking to your stakeholders. You can identify and prioritize the common issues by understanding the severity of the implications and the consequences using some of the stats and the results sections of the papers you referred to. And this is something interesting that I've used as well. You can use secondhand quotes and graphs from relevant papers to kind of ground actions in user stories and generate empathy with, ultimately the users you're designing for using secondhand data. I've talked about, making educated guesses about the efficacy and success of your design recommendations as well using desk research, right? You can see, to do this, you can actually see how these recommendations performed in other similar domains and products. What were the potential determinants of success and adoption in that case? So you can actually supplement your design recommendations by a value add that tells your stakeholders like, hey, you should probably do this additional thing based on my understanding of what has come before, and actually that adds more value to your design recommendations. And when it comes to defining KPIs and success metrics, you can use desk research to get really specific about the metric, its goal, and its signal. So for example, like on an employee experience project recently, I was able to refer to some articles from Nielsen Norman Group about some employee experience metrics that would be really useful based, on their understanding and their research, and contextualize them to our designs. And that really helped me get a head start on understanding how to get an understanding of how to view analytics data, how to view UX audits, and define a future strategy for that project. And then as I'm talking about future strategy, that's where like desk research also becomes really important to suggest and inform future research, right? So you don't want to leave stakeholders and clients or different team members with just a list of insights and recommendations without concrete next steps and suggestions for building on the research that you've done. That's where desk research can be a good value add as well, because you can actually look at your findings and see what are the recommendations that other researchers have postulated in recent times in their discussions and their results section that would be good opportunities to explore. And you can actually supplement these opportunities with concrete methods. So you don't, for example, like if you're studying how developers use AI in their process, you don't want to just say that the next step would be probably to like study them across a range of time. You want to also suggest a method on how to do that. And you can actually focus your desk research searches in understanding which would be the best methods to explore a similar kind of problem in the future, and supplement your future research recommendations with actual actionable steps. Now, in order for you to do all that I've said before, predict the success of design recommendations, see the validity of your, like current research, suggest future research recommendations, all that hinges on is the quality of your sources, right? Because if your sources are not great, it directly impacts the quality of the project itself, right? So how should you actually go about maximizing the quality of desk research? So in this talk, it just really comes down to two things: identifying information-rich sources and verifying their authenticity. So when it comes to information richness, I've said this multiple times, but this is really important. Start high level, because high level sources can give you access to a vast amount of data in a short amount of time, and also nicely summarize them. So, these sources could include literature reviews, meta-analyses, comprehensive blog articles, industry publications. For example, like I've always found that Google Research and Microsoft Research pages have a lot of good sources that have the level of rigor that is similar to academic research. but at the same time, they have that industry pragmatism and point of view, and it's a lot easier to go through them as well. So they are like really good starting sources, right? Because they are great at summarizing huge amounts of data into cohesive and digestible chunks. And someone else is actually doing the exploring, collecting, and indexing from you if you remember those steps that we talked about earlier. So, and as I said in the search strategies tip, that these high-level sources can be a great way to identify and narrow down which empirical, more detailed articles you want to read. Paying attention to databases. That's really important when it comes to identifying the most information rich sources, right? So based on my experience within this field, here are some like useful databases that you can actually search to identify good quality peer-reviewed articles. So in UX research, IEEE, which is like a database for all things engineering related and engineering psychology related. ACM has a good, database from articles on human-computer interaction, like the CHI conference articles and talks are also published in ACM. ACM's database, Human Factors, which is a journal started by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, has really great articles that I've used multiple times in grad school, and their review process is really rigorous. And they also review for like writing and legibility, so it's easy to read complex information in digestible chunks. You can also check the impact factor of an article, which basically tells you how many citations that this paper has, how many people have derived value. So the more citations, like usually the more credible the paper, but at the same time, you also want to pay attention to things that I'll be talking about in the next section. So another good way would be to identify industrial thought leaders in that space. If you're, regularly using LinkedIn, other weekly newsletters, and see if they have blogs on that particular domain or a published research section on Google Scholar or something that you can refer to. And yeah, a lot of these databases may be paid and the articles may have a paywall. But if you want free resources, check out ResearchGate, where authors usually make their articles freely available, and university websites relevant to author affiliation. So if a author is affiliated to UCSD, chances are that their paper may be published on their university website somewhere for free, and you don't have to actually pay these journals for access. And now coming to verifying authenticity, all that glitters is not valid, reliable, and relevant. The title may seem like, hey, this is going to be the best article. Like, this is really relevant to me. I'm so excited. And, so you get biased as you're reading through the data. Yes, this confirms everything I've said. I thought about it, relates so well. But if it's not authentic, if it's not valid, then it doesn't really mean anything. Anyone could write anything, and it wouldn't really have implications for your project if it's not a quality source. So what are some things to look out for when you're verifying the authenticity of a source? One is its quality. Is it peer-reviewed? Are they explaining rationale behind conclusions, or are they expecting you to take their word for it? Which, as researchers, we never should, right? Which sources did they use? Is it just coming from like really all of the sources are from Wikipedia, which in some cases can be a great source, but you don't want to derive insights from articles which don't go deeper, right? And are the authors reputed in their domains? That's usually not, that shouldn't be the sole criteria, but can definitely help, triangulate the other factors that I've talked about if the author is reputed in their domain. The validity. This is really important. And as researchers, we are familiar with this concept. We have studied this a lot. Can they make the claims they are making based on their method? It's all good to have the most impactful results and conclusions, but if the method doesn't allow you to make that conclusion, it's not true. It's not something that you can actually use in your project, right? Are their findings generalizable to your context? So a finding may be valid in its own right, but you have to also evaluate its external validity. Can I use findings from human automation teaming in a driverless car environment in my project with developers? In some cases, I may be able to, but in a lot of other cases, no. I need to actually look out for that and evaluate that intentionally. And last, did they actually address their research questions and hypotheses, or are they just doing post hoc analysis without explicitly outlining that? The reliability. This comes down to, again, the value that desk research can provide, actually triangulating data across multiple sources, right? Does this finding align with what you've already read? And the misalignment can be equally informative in its own right, but you definitely should know about that. Because if this finding doesn't agree with like maybe 10 other papers that are more recent and saying a different thing, you probably don't want to include that source in your analysis, right? And what does more recent research say, right? As I said, like, does this finding still hold true? And that relates to the recency, right? What is the time frame you want to stay in when you're searching for sources? Based on your domain, it could look really different. In AI, you want to probably stay like within the last 2 years to find the most recent findings when it comes to those specific insights. But for generalized human automation teaming principles, for example, you can extend that time period to like a lot, backwards by a lot, because findings along the lines of how humans team up with AI, collaborate with them, would stay consistent. And I was just attending a talk on design futures before my presentation, and that's actually what the talk was about, was also understanding what stays consistent over a period of time and what is changing in the short term, right? So be cognizant of that. How fast is your domain evolving? Okay, so I've talked a lot at this stage. Just to briefly recap, we've talked about minimizing research by understanding how to scope research, some tips and tricks to maximize the efficiency through which you do desk research, understanding sources more quickly, and using those sources and your desk research to maximize both the project quality and maximizing the quality of desk research itself. Now, I'm happy to take some questions and engage in some discussion.
Hey, Ani, do you hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Right. So thank you so much for such a big, rich idea field presentation. Lots of interesting tips and ideas in there. I really appreciate the tip about using the appendices from texts as sources of articles to pursue. So that was one that resonated with me. I invite the participants to put questions for Ani in the chat. We had one from Kyle. It may have been answered. What tool or index do you use to determine who cited who?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to actually the feed backward search strategy, if I can just pull up that picture really quick. So when it comes to identifying the sources that came before, usually the reference section is really great, and you don't even have to open the article in most cases. Usually good academic databases have the reference section of an article cross-referenced and linked on their summary page, like when you actually access the article. So you can look at that list in a more easy manner. When it comes to feed forward search, over here, I have a screenshot from a database page where it'll usually have a button saying cited by or see citations. And if you click on that, it will pull up a list of all articles sorted by year or type that have cited the same article in the future. So that's usually my process of determining like who cited who. And Google Scholar, like Emily suggested, is also great at doing that. But in some cases, you may find more accurate and relevant results going to that specific database itself.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Sam asks, how do you organize your findings during or after your desk research? Do you use a Google Doc? Do you make a presentation? Are there any formats or presentations of your findings that you have found to be particularly easy to reference or share with others?
Right. So I'll answer the first part of the question first. So usually I've heard some researchers use like tools like Airtable or Notion or all these new tools, but like I'm a bit old school in that. I just like to keep it simple, Google Sheets or Excel. And usually since we in industry work in really collaborative environments, I usually find Google Sheets to be a good tool because everyone can access it easily. They don't have to download different apps if they use different workflows. So yeah, I use Google Sheets, but what I usually like to do in Google Sheets is create tags and columns for themes, like I would do for analyzing user interview data. So I can actually look at the themes at a much more deeper level and see patterns. And that relates to the formats of the presentations as well. Usually in industry, you got to understand the bottom line and the story you want to tell and structure your presentation around that story. You don't want to regurgitate like a list of every source and summary you found. So in industry and like a client or like stakeholder oriented presentations, you want to highlight the major insight and recommendation. But at the same time, since it's desk research, you don't have user quotes, you want to retain a small amount or like proportion of the slide for actually citing your sources. That increases the credibility and rigor of your presentation without making it seem like, oh, I'm digesting this like huge amounts of like academic information that I really didn't sign up for, and really tell like a comprehensive story.
I like that a lot. Sticking with the story, the motivations for practitioner desk research are different from the motivations for academic research. And in practitioner research, you want to support the story. You want to focus on the business case. You're not necessarily meticulously defending every position and every decision with 10 citations like an academic might.
Yep, exactly. And the important point to remember is that you want to maintain that rigor personally, so that if there are questions, because since you don't have like user videos or like that graphs from your survey data and stuff to like back your research, you yourself have to be confident in your sources and your level of analysis, and in a way that requires a higher level of strategic thinking and critical analysis. Okay. But at the same time, you got to be selective, as you said, about like what do stakeholders really care about? What will make this resonate with them? But if there are questions and discussions, you got to be prepared yourself.
Okay, I love that distinction. And you mentioned that citations do add credibility to your message, whether in the practitioner land or academic land. So,
yep, exactly.
So let's see. We have April, who's a doctoral student and researcher. And I think you addressed this in your last answer. I'm still not sure how you are referencing the articles into your research. Do you use them in the report appendix, or do you speak on them during the report readouts?
Usually, yeah. In terms of like the visual presentation of it, like I don't want them to be the star of the slide itself. I want the slide and the story to be really about the insight or the recommendation I'm speaking about. But for people who want to like refer them, there should be a small, I usually use footnotes supported by those like, numbers as super text next to a finding that has come from directly from an insight. In my talk track, I make sure in my presentations to distinguish between this is something that is my understanding, and this is something that has directly come from a source or a particular desk research section or something like that. But yes, for people, stakeholders who may be reading it asynchronously or going through my presentation at a later time, if they want to actually go and look up a source that they are interested in, I want to be really transparent and accessible by providing them with a comprehensive list of articles in the appendix. And to do that more efficiently, instead of organizing them as you would in an academic world by all those conventions like the alphabetical order and those things, instead of that, think about what matters to your stakeholders, and I organize them by topic. So it's really easy to browse through.
Okay, love it. And let's see. So I have a question about access to resources. So you spent time in academia, you have a master's degree in human factors from Wright State University, and when you're affiliated with an academic institution, you have access to the library resources of that institution, which today probably cover lots of digital databases. And I find when my academic affiliation wanes and I approach research as a practitioner, I took for granted a lot of the research sources that I had, or the sources for conducting research. Have you encountered that? And do you have any tips for accessing sources as a practitioner?
Yeah, that's a great question. My access just expired this January. Really sad about that, but yeah. But my usual go-to is ResearchGate and university websites. So usually, like if you find an article, like let's say on something like SagePub or JSTOR or something, and it's like you have to pay $40 just to access like one PDF. You can usually search for that same title on Google Scholar, and if there's a free PDF available, Google Scholar is great as cross-linking that right next to the source in its result. And usually you'll find that PDF it lives on a university website where the author is affiliated with. Because unfortunately, authors really don't get paid for any journal copies that are sold, so they don't really care about making their work freely available. And ResearchGate and these university websites are great places. On ResearchGate, if the paper is not there, a PDF is not available, some authors are great about responding like immediately. Like if you email them, hey, I'm doing this project, can I see your paper? I think it would be really great for me to read. They usually email you a copy.
Okay, those are all good tips, and tips that I've found to be true myself. Individual authors are maybe more willing to share their work than you might think. So personal outreach is one tip. I've also had some luck with public library systems in major cities. They often have digital database access for card holders. So are there any other questions from the audience? We've done well here. This was one of the 1-hour session slots, and we're in our final minute.
Yep, I tried to keep it on time. There was a lot.
You stuck the landing, as they say in gymnastics. So,
yep.
Okay, Ani. If there are no more questions, I think we can conclude the session. But thank you so much. I think you provided a lot of value, and thank you to the participants. And on to the next session in 15 minutes.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Alan. Bye.